Hello and welcome back to my channel, and this is Weird Wednesday episode 4. If you follow me on TikTok, you would have seen that I recently posted a 10-part series that everybody complained about because there were so many parts, about a mystery slash urban legend slash hoax from the Art Bell era of Coast to Coast radio. And a lot of people in those TikTok videos asked me to make a more in-depth YouTube video. So here we are, Weird Wednesday episode 4, and we are diving down a bottomless hole in Ellensburg, Washington. Before we get into the video, I do want to make it very clear that I do not believe that this is real. I do believe that it is a hoax, but regardless, I think it's an incredibly interesting story, and it also kind of shows how stories fall apart in the third act. Let's be real, but we'll get to that when we get to it. Now, a little bit of background. If you don't know what Coast to Coast radio is, it's currently being hosted by a guy called George Norrie, but back in the day, it used to be hosted by a man called Art Bell. When it was hosted by him, it used to be more of like a paranormal, weird mystery kind of show. It was never really a thing here in the UK, but as I got more and more interested in like mysteries and weird stories, that kind of thing, I discovered like the Art Bell archives, and I went through a long period of just going back and listening through them all. They're so fascinating. There are so many strange stories. There's a lot of problematic stuff as well. There's a lot of strange mysteries, and this is one of them. Now, our story begins in 1997 when Art Bell received a fax from a man who claimed that he had a bottomless hole on his property, and that man was named Mel Waters. Hence the title of this video, Mel's Hole. So obviously Art gets this fax and he's like, oh my god, what a wild story, a bottomless hole. I need to talk to this guy. So he books him on to come on to Coast to Coast. And this is the first time that Mel appeared on Coast to Coast back in 1997.
Mel, are you there?
Yes, I am.
All right. When did you discover this hole?
Mel says that he bought this property and he's had it for a few years, but the people before that owned it for like 30 years. And the bottomless pit that's on the property is quite well known by the neighbours because they used to use it as like a trash dump.
Yeah, we've been there for several years, and we just take all we take all of our trash, rubbish, anything we have that we have to get rid of, we take it, throw it in the hole. Everyone's throwing their stuff in the hole.
And the weird thing about this hole is, like, no matter what they put down it, number one, they didn't hear it hit the bottom, and number two, it never got filled up. He claims that it's a round pit and that it's got a stone wall surrounding it, and the stone wall goes down about 15 feet into the hole, and then after that it's just kind of like earth, basically. So along with like nothing being able to hit the bottom of the hole, there was also other strange occurrences that happened with it. Mel says that animals are terrified of it, like they will not go anywhere near it. You try and bring your dog up there and the dog is like, no thank you, not having it at all. And it's not just Mel's dogs, like it's all the other dogs as well. Mel tells a story about how a local hunter's dog sadly passed away and he disposed of the animal in the hole.
One guy claims that he threw his departed canine down into the hole.
Oh, really?
And he swears, well, the story is the guy that did it swears the dog actually came back to him.
The hunter then went on to say that he saw that dog running alive through the woods, which led Mel to speculate as to whether the hole had any paranormal or supernatural powers.
That's not, that's not my dog. That's not my...
It's not your story, but it's a story of a resurrected dog.
Mel claims that he used to be a shark fisherman, so he's got like loads of line and stuff hanging around in his house. So the first experiment that he did, he put some Lifesavers candy on the end of some fishing line and put it into the hole. He put it down 1,500 feet thinking there might be water at the bottom, it might dissolve the candy, but there was nothing there. Like when he brought it back up, candy was perfectly fine at 1,500 feet. So the next experiment that he did, he put 1 pound weight onto the fishing line and he sent it down. Now he was like, I'm just going to keep going. Like, let's see how deep this hole really is. And he just kept attaching spool after spool of fishing line until, according to Mel, it went down 15 miles deep. So Mel doesn't know what the hell was going on. Art Bell doesn't know what the hell's going on. Everybody's super confused and people start to call in.
Mike suggests that we throw a cat down the hole. Listen to the cat scream as it goes down. It's a horrible idea. I don't know about people who do that, throw down a cat. Oh, man.
Art Bell is basically like, you need to find somebody who is willing to be lowered into this pit.
Mel, I say that we got to put a person down there, a volunteer.
Not a cat.
No, not a cat.
Cats.
No cats. A media person. One of these anchors.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that you would like somebody to be lowered down into the hole.
That's right.
I would be willing to do that.
See, there you go, sir, a volunteer.
But Mel's like, I can't do that. We don't know what's down there. There might be like toxic gas. We have no idea what this hole is. Very responsible of Mel. Another interesting thing happens when Art Bell is like, well, what happens if you have like a terminal illness? Would you throw yourself into the hole? And Mel is like, yeah, I might as well. Considering what happened with the dog, I don't think that's a bad shout. You know, if you know that you're going to pass away, you might as well just throw yourself into the hole and see what happens. You might come out the other side alive and well. Here are some important bits of information to note before we get into the later part of the story. So Mel claimed that he once found like a traditional lucky money bag around the vicinity of the Bottomless hole, and inside this money bag he found some Roosevelt dimes.
I work or working in the alternative health field here and on a property, and that's one of the reasons, and this can all come out now. I imported some plant life from northern Nevada. They were Native American plants that the Indians used there for treatment of various illnesses, mostly cold and flu.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we, because of the nature of the climate, and it's very similar to northern Nevada, we thought we would cultivate these plants and then use it as a cure. It's a very effective cure.
He liked to make belt buckles, and sometimes he used like commemorative coins and things that he found in the belt buckles. And he also had a wife. It was a little while until we hear from Mel again, but when he next calls in to Coast, he gives Art Bell an update on everything that's happened post the original phone call.
Explain again. You went up to your property. You were going to examine the hole because we were talking about it. I'm sure you have interest. So, and they stopped you there, huh?
He says that the day after his appearance on Coast to Coast, he went back to his property after like just going out somewhere, and that there were uniformed officials that were blocking his entry into his home. Now they said to him that he can't get in because there's been some sort of plane crash in the area and it's all had to be sealed off. But Mel was like, well, there's no smoke here and this is all a little bit weird.
That was the thing. I said, well, where's the smoke? I've seen plane crashes before. There's got to be smoke. And, you know, again, I asked to talk to the officer in charge there, and I figured, you know, one of these military types would come up, and I don't know, maybe he was just dressed in civilian clothes because of, you know, the nature of what happened there. But, you know, he told me that I won't be able to go out there until the accident's been investigated.
So then the uniformed officials changed their tack a little bit, and they're like, do you know what, Mel, you've got a big mouth, you've been talking to people that you shouldn't have, and we know about all the things that you've been doing on this property with your medicinal herbs, and let's just say that a drug lab could be easily found here, if you know what I mean.
Well, there is a lab there, though. I mean, and...
yeah, but there's no, you're not cranking out crank or methamphetamine or anything?
Yeah, but if they had, for instance, if they found like it was a drug lab, they could seize my property.
So then Mel is like, I'm going to go to the press. I've got a connection with Art Bell. I'm going to tell everybody what you guys are doing. So the uniformed officials are like, all right, Mel, hold on a little bit. Like, we can make this worth your while. How about we offer to lease this property from you for $250,000 a month?
When you and I last spoke,
yes.
Your encounter with those strange folks up there, you had another encounter with them, and they made you an offer you couldn't refuse.
Yeah. Well, first they intimidated the hell out of me. Ultimately, they did make me an offer that I could not refuse, and I will tell you the offer that they made me. We put together a very interesting package and a very interesting lease on the land.
Yeah, you told me that they had made you an offer for the land, essentially, which was going to be, if I recall correctly, leasing it
in perpetuity.
In perpetuity. In other words, forever, or for your life anyway.
That's exactly.
Now, Mel's not a stupid guy, and he's like, yeah, go on then, 250 grand a month, like, this is some easy cash. And with that cash, he decides to relocate to Australia to set up a wombat research and rescue project. He's a kind soul, is Mel. He wants to just save the wombats, and Art Bell actually confirms that he received communication from Mel from Australia. Mel also says that the government allowed him to bring his dogs with him and like his medicinal plants, which like totally bypasses the law of the land in Australia. They're usually like super strict over that kind of stuff. But with Mel, they were like, you go ahead, mate. Our friend Mel, he can do whatever he wants. Now in December of 1999, Mel decides to go back to the US to visit with his family. Now Mel says that he was like helping one of his family members move, and he got on a bus.
Basically, we had to return the truck back to the Tacoma area. So I got them all settled here. I got up to Tacoma, returned the truck, and I was going to take the bus down to Olympia. Just take the transit. There's a bus that runs from Tacoma to Olympia.
And he says that he was headed for Olympia, but while he was on that bus, there was some sort of like fight or argument between some of the passengers that were on it, and the bus basically stopped, and he got off the bus, and the police were there, and they asked him to give a statement.
people got on the bus and they wanted to ask questions about what happened on the bus. And I got off the bus and I said, I talked to these guys here, but I have to get them back. I have to get back to Olympia here because they're going to do all of this here. And so they said, that's no problem. We're going to, we've got the transit bus here. We'll just take you back to Olympia. Mm-hmm. And I says, okay. And that's the last thing I remember.
And he wakes up 12 days later in an alley in San Francisco with no recollection of where he's been for the past almost 2 weeks. He says that he was badly beaten, some of his teeth were missing, there was like something in his arm where an IV had been. And he also says, important to note, that the homemade belt buckle that he was wearing at the time had been stolen.
These bums were basically trying to wake me up.
Holy mackerel!
They were trying to get me to sing. I remember this. They were trying to get me to sing On the Road Again because I sort of looked like Willie Nelson.
Now, when he gets to a bank or wherever he was, he realises that all of his money has been taken out of his account. And he also finds out that his Wombat Research and Rescue Project has been totally dismantled and all of his employees have been laid off. And it's during this time that the government serve him papers saying that he's in violation of building codes on his property, which he doesn't have access to. And they actually just decide to seize his land because they're obviously just like, you know, we're the government, like we can do whatever the hell we want. Why are we paying this random guy $250,000 a month when we could just take the damn property for ourselves?
I'm a curious fellow. I mean, any guy that runs 80,000 feet of line into
he's a curious guy. Yeah,
a curious guy. There was some legal action taken against me.
Legal action.
The legal action was taken on behalf of my former wife.
I see.
Basically, I had the property through part of the divorce settlement there, and I helped her with her school, and it was pretty worthless land. And she said, "Well, I'll give you that as part of the settlement there." And I wasn't.
So then, what was the legal action? She wanted the whole back?
Well, what happened was that the papers I was served with said that I was in violation of the terms of the lease with her.
His nephew sorts him out with some sort of like transportation back to Washington, and Mel's kind of hung up on the fact that his belt buckle has been stolen. He's like, why has that been stolen? He's cursing the day that he ever spoke about the bottomless hole. But he knows that because he used to make them, there are other belt buckles out there. So he's in Ellensburg, Washington, and he decides to try and track down somebody that he sold one of his belt buckles to. And luckily for him, he finds somebody, and he's like analysing the belt buckle, and he sees that one of the dimes that he had used in the belt buckle was from 1943. Now, I'm no master of coin, but Mel explains that basically a 1943 Roosevelt dime doesn't exist. The first Roosevelt dime was minted in 1948, and he also notices that like on every dime or like coin or anything like that, there's a letter that's like the initial of the city in which it was minted. Again, I'm not a master of coin. I didn't know these things. Now, here's what's interesting. Apparently, there is no city that begins with B that is on a coin or has like minted a coin. So they're like, this is a bit suspicious.
That's weird.
And the owner of the belt buckle decides to take it to a like coin person, like probably a literal master of a coin.
He decides to go see a big time coin dealer about this coin. And he goes in there, and the coin dealer takes a look at it. He just is like, mouth is hanging open. I'm telling you, I'm relating the story from my buddy. He looks at this thing, and he's just flabbergasted.
But what I don't understand is how all this relates.
Well, it ties into why my belt buckle was taken.
Oh.
Because it had the same coin on there.
Oh.
The coin dealer was just amazed. He had he couldn't even begin to grasp what he was holding in front of him. The guy offered him a huge amount of money.
And the owner of the belt buckle was like, I'll ruminate on it for a little while, I'll think about it. But he took his bloody time because the Treasury Department turned up and they confiscated the coin from him. So he missed out on that deal. He should have sold the dang coin. Now, some people speculated that one of the reasons why Mel might have found these 1943 dimes on the property is that the property could have been like a portal to alternative universes, like different timelines. A timeline where a 1943 Roosevelt dime actually exists. And then Mel goes on to drop another bomb on the listeners of Coast to Coast. He asks Art Bell if he knows what a Terraserver is. Now, back in the day, the public didn't have Google Maps, and we didn't really have like access to very high quality satellite imagery, but the Terraserver was kind of like the closest you could get to that. The Terraserver was made available in 1997, but it was like a few months after Mel's initial phone call into Coast to Coast. And Mel tells the audience that are listening that he has basically found on the Terraserver like where his property is, and he says that there's a huge white patch that is like completely blotted out on the map. So Art Bell is like, well, my listeners know what the Terraserver is, they're going to find it, they're going to get on this. And sure enough they do, and they find out going on the Terraserver that Mel is actually telling the truth, and this area where he claims that his property is and where the bottomless hole is has actually been like whited out on the Terraserver.
Well, in this neck of the woods, there's one great big white blotted out area where I presume, were I to be able to see it, and it does look like a very interesting area, actually.
Oh, yeah.
There would be Mels Hole somewhere there, huh?
Yeah, that I think that blotch over there covers like a 4 mile by 8 mile area.
My goodness.
It's at this point that Art says that he knows that like TV crews have gone up there and that they've seen like military personnel knocking about there. Now Mel also says that there was a truck stop in the area and that a lot of truckers would claim to see like lights shooting up into the sky. Mel describes this as anti-light, and he says like that's what the truckers are kind of describing it as. Now a lot of people, when I posted this on TikTok, said, how would a trucker know what anti-light is? And I just want to say that truckers know a lot of stuff. If you want to know about what's going on, ask a trucker. Full of wisdom.
Have you paid your dues, Jack? Yes, sir, the check is in the mail.
So people are kind of speculating as to whether there are more bottomless holes that exist. And Mel says actually they do exist, and I know of one of them. He says that a lot of people listen to like his initial calls on Coast to Coast, and a lot of people are getting in contact with him. And one of them was a group of Native Americans who were really interested in like some of the things that he was doing with medicinal plants. So they invited him down to where they live in Nevada. Now Mel was saying like how some of the best medicinal plants that he was growing were around the vicinity of the hole, and they were like, well, come and meet these people because they've got a story to tell you too. So they bring him to a Basque village in Nevada that has its own bottomless hole.
So I'm up there, and this land is used by members of the Basque, B-A-S-Q-U-E community.
Now they bring Mel to this Basque village in Nevada where they're kind of raising sheep, and they tell him that this hole has been here like forever, like since they've been here, and that they consider it like a spiritual point. It's got a lot of the same characteristics as the original hole in Ellensburg, Washington. It's got like sound cancelling abilities, nothing hits the bottom, and animals are bloody terrified of it. So Mel, who doesn't have access to the original hole, is like, well, do you know what? I've got a couple of experiments that I want to do. So let's get on with it, lads. The first experiment consisted of getting a bucket of store-bought ice and lowering it into the pit. So they're lowering it down, and after a while they bring it back up and they find that the ice hasn't melted. But here's where it gets weird. Mel goes to pick it up and it's warm to the touch. So it's like, this is a bit weird. Why is this ice not melting? Like, it's not even melting on his hands. So they take the ice to a fire pit and it doesn't melt. In fact, it catches alight.
Oh, okay, what we'll do here is we take this bucket and we'll stick it on the fire. So we put it on there and the ice catches fire. I will tell you that this bucket, well, some of the bucket there is still sitting there, as far as I know today, still doing what it was doing the day we put it into the ground.
He said it wasn't a big yellow flame, it was more kind of like a light flicker that was on it, but still very weird. And one guy took the burning ice home and used it in his cabin. More on that later.
One guy took some of the stuff home, he put it in his wood stove, and he's got a cabin out there, and it gets damn cold where he is, and the thing has been keeping his place warm. And one guy wanted to be lowered into the hole himself. What's going to happen to a human being down there?
Well, there are obviously a lot of people like that, Mel, because I had two of them in the first hour of the program, and they said they would love to be lowered into such a hole.
I'm ashamed to admit it.
Oh?
Is that we decided to lower a sheep.
Really?
To the hole.
So Mel says that like one of the Basque people that were there was like, I want to know what's in this hole, lower me down into it. But all the other people were like, absolutely not. We don't know what's going to happen, but we do have a bunch of sheep knocking about, so why don't we just throw one of them down it? So they're bringing the sheep towards the hole, and the sheep is like, absolutely not, because obviously the animals just don't go anywhere near it. So the only way that they could get this sheep into like the crate thing that they had provided for it was to like knock it out. So they knock it out, they put it in this box, and they start to kind of like maneuver it towards the hole. The sheep wakes up again. Again, it's like, absolutely not, don't put me in this hole. Like, please God, save me, somebody. But obviously the Basque are like, like, you're going in. Now they bring the crate over the hole, and they say that like when it went over the hole, the sheep like totally stopped. Remember like the noise cancelling properties of the hole? Maybe that's what it was. But they say that like the crate was still like shaking ferociously. The animal was absolutely terrified. So in the sheep goes down 1,500 feet, and they leave it there for about half an hour.
And then we decided to, bring it back up.
Right, sure.
So we're hoisting this thing up here, cranking away, getting this thing up on there, and it's kind of a job. So we finally get up to the surface, and we got the box out of there, and the one thing we notice is there isn't any movement in the box.
Now when they bring it back up, the crate on the outside looks absolutely fine, but when they open it up, they find that the sheep is deceased inside, allegedly. There's no like kind of harm that's been done to it. So they're like, what's going on? So one of the Basque butchers is like, let's open her up, let's find out what happened to this sheep. So the sheep gets on the chopping board or whatever it is on, they open it up, and inside
it looks like there was gel in the cavity there, and something that looked like this huge tumor, and almost taking up the entire length of the body cavity.
Oh, Mel.
They say that the sheep looked like it had been cooked, and they said that it had some sort of tumorous growth inside of it.
It's not a tumor. It's not a tumor at all.
So naturally, they cut it out and opened it up, and when they opened it up, they found
a fetal seal.
They said that it had flippers, but it also had human eyes, and that it was alive, and it was attached to this like tumor thing with an umbilical cord.
Like a human being. I mean, what like cat eyes look like?
Oh yeah.
You know what dog eyes look like?
Oh yeah.
I don't know what seal eyes look like, but I know what human eyes look like.
Sure you do.
And this thing looks like it had human eyes, and the thing was alive, but it was connected to the tumor, like with this umbilical cord.
Now they say that the creature kind of like looked up and was kind of just looking around, like assessing where the hell it was, attached itself from the umbilical cord, and Mel says,
I just felt I was in the presence of something extraordinary, something beyond extraordinary, something like, I don't know, I'm not a religious man, but it felt in that category of having a religious thing there, where this was just such a stunning thing to witness.
Well, something that far from our understanding would appear to be magic or religion or whatever you want to call it, I'm sure. Yeah, so what God's name happened to this thing?
It was some proper X-Files shit going on. Mel says that the creature kind of like slid towards the end of the table it was on, and Mel felt compelled to pick it up. So he kind of goes to pick it up, and then he feels compelled to put it on the floor. And when he does, he kind of like looks at his hands, he smells his hand, and he said it smelled like ozone, which is a very specific smell. And I think he's alluding to his theory that this creature came from like inside the earth. Now apparently when the creature was on the ground, everybody that was there got kind of hypnotized by it, and they ended up staring at it for like 2 hours. Mel says that the look on its face was the most compassionate look he had ever witnessed, which does kind of make you wonder what his wife was like.
And the look that it was giving us, the only way I can describe it, it was like the most compassionate look that I'd ever seen from any face.
So the creature then decides to slide towards the hole, and Mel kind of like helps it up, and the creature they say that the creature looked back at them and kind of like gave them a nod, like an acknowledging nod, before it jumped in the hole.
It looks at us, it actually nodded at us. It made like a slow nod. They turned around and went back into the hole. At this point, we were close to it, so we watched him go all the way down as far as we could see, and we didn't have high-powered lights or anything, so no sound, nothing like that. It
into the hole, and that was it.
Into the hole.
Apparently everybody was properly drained after this. They were like, bloody hell, what an experience. We had just been in the presence of like an ozone creature. Now, important to note that at the time, Mel had actually been diagnosed with a form of cancer. And after his visit in Nevada, he went back to the doctor, who told him that he was totally cured. It was totally gone. And Mel thanks the creature for that.
And I went back to the doctor, and they could find no evidence of any cancer.
Is it your feeling that your proximity to the hole or something about the hole changed this?
I think it was the seal.
The seal.
I think it was the seal.
The seal.
Anyway, after the seal jumps in the hole and they kind of dumped the remaining parts of the sheep back in it as well, they're all kind of like chilling out, and Mel's getting ready to go. And a Basque elder goes up to Mel, and he's like, I've always told people around here that this is a spiritual hole. we always knew something was going on. This Basque elder also passes him something. It's like, here's this thing, look after it, and like, don't look at it until you're away from here. Mel puts it in his pocket, doesn't look at it. When he eventually does pull it out, he sees that it's a 1943 Roosevelt dime. Now he's like, finally, I've got it back, the 1943 Roosevelt dime. So he does some experiments on it. He said that when you moved more than 15 feet away from the dime, it would disappear from view. He also said that conveniently, it doesn't show up on cameras or scanners. He also said that post his visit to the Basque village, there'd been a lot of like helicopters swirling around the area. And he also gives us an update on the guy that took the burning ice back to his cabin to keep him warm. He says that this guy noticed that he was like dry all the time, like his skin was dry and he was really thirsty, and also like the cabin around him was really dry as well.
I don't know, he must have been living in humidity lower than what you face out there in the desert, and so he's got this kettle up on top there, trying to humidify the air. And one night he notices that steam from the kettle looked like it was being absorbed into the stove.
He also says that one time the guy got home and he saw that his stove had crashed into the earth and was now like sunken into the ground. But despite all that, he continued to use it and he continued to use the ice. So one day he's out and he comes home and his entire cabin has just like disintegrated and it's sunk even further into the ground.
About, I don't know, a week, maybe 2 weeks later, he comes home, and the entire cabin has collapsed.
What?
Around the whole thing.
The whole thing?
Everything has collapsed around it. In fact, all there is around the site of the cabin is piles of wood dust. Wood dust.
Wood dust.
Wood dust.
So in other words, his cabin disintegrated.
It basically looked like all of the moisture that was in the wood had been sucked out of it completely to the point that it could no longer exist as wood.
So he's like, whatever, goes back to live with his brothers, like it's gone, and he comes back and now it's like 5 foot into the ground and it's like, it looks weird. So the guy calls up Mel and Mel decides that the best thing to do was to call the uniformed officials, like the ones that shafted him previously. So apparently this official is like dead worried about it and he's like, oh my God, I need to know where this is now. I need to get to its stat. So they all come and they try and like pull this cabin in this stove out of the ground with all these cranes and like nothing can move it at all. It's properly wedged in and it takes like multiple cranes, all of these chain things that they've got, and apparently the biggest truck in the world to carry it away.
They get it up and they load it onto the biggest truck this guy had ever seen in his life. This was bigger than big, and they haul that thing away. It's like gone, there's over there, and so they just took the stove away. I don't know if he got a good look to see what the stove looked like, but they loaded whatever was in there, detached the chains from the hooks and stuff, and trucked this thing off.
Now in this time, Mel says that he's been followed by people, he's getting worried, and that the Basque have been in contact with him and said that the creature has actually come back multiple times and that they found a way to communicate with it through a boombox. And the creature had a very interesting warning for anybody that would find the ice. It said that the ice can and would destroy the earth in a very short amount of time, and that they predicted that greedy and undisciplined use of the ice would occur in this world. It also said that intelligent beings in other worlds were predicting that planet Earth would be destroyed through nuclear war, and that when the burning ice is found throughout the universe, it is almost always used improperly. Those beings on other planets are actually planning to move into ours if we destroy ourselves with nuclear war.
They said from the seal creatures that the ice can and would destroy the world in a very little amount of time. And that's the warnings that they were giving. They said that the world would be destroyed by the improper use of the ice, but they anticipate that greedy and undisciplined use of the ice will probably occur in this world.
Greedy and undisciplined
use of the ice.
All right, listen to me, my friend. We've got to go.
That's fine.
I want you to tell me, swear to me that you'll get hold of some people at the University of Washington.
I will.
Or wherever, and proceed with this, will you?
Talk to the Basque. I think they're thinking along my way. They have no real vested interest.
All right, I'm going to look for that to happen, Mel. You take care, my friend.
And that was the last time that anybody ever heard of Mel Waters. Now, as I've previously said, I don't believe this story at all. I don't think Mel Waters existed. I think this is just a fictional tale from the 90s, very much like a 90s, early 2000s version of like a creepypasta story or something that you'd find on like Reddit No Sleep or something like that. It's an urban legend, a bit of a mystery, but it's really, really interesting, and it actually inspired a few spin-offs of its own. So in 2005, a woman called Kimberly from Manitoba, Canada called in and said that she had her own experience with the bottomless hole. Again, it had a lot of the same properties. It had noise cancelling properties. She found strange artifacts around it. There was like beams of light coming up from the hole, and it was supposedly bottomless because they'd throw things down it and it would never fill up, and also they never heard anything hit the bottom. In 2008, a man named Red Elk stepped forward and said that he had an experience with the hole in 1961.
He said, "This is an endless hole." And people get it confused with what I call the devil's hole.
He also made some claims about how the military was using the area in which the bottomless hole was on.
It's an underground base, a very small underground base.
He got in contact with a lot of media and he led a few expeditions to try and find Mels Hole. Important to note that they didn't find it.
I believe there is a hole.
But Philip Lipson's never seen the hole, even though he's led expeditions to find it.
Well, I think it's actually a true event, just something that's never really been totally uncovered.
Ellensburg Public Library historian Milton Waggy says the phone rang off the hook with all kinds of stories about the hole, some explainable, some not. He's still trying to solve the mystery of what happened to the library's file on Mels Hole.
Well, it just disappeared, which lends itself to the mysteriousness of Mels Hole. You know, did Mel take it? Did it just sort of rise out of the locked file cabinet?
There's no proof that any of these people existed. Kimberly, Mel, the Wombat Rescue Centre, all of this stuff, the man with the bloody Roosevelt dime stuff, any of the Basque elders in Nevada, nobody has ever stepped forward to actually say this has happened, except for this one guy, Red Elk, who couldn't actually find the bottomless hole. But despite all that, it continues to fascinate so many people. And I think that's why this story, when I put it on TikTok, got so much traction. It's got all the elements of a good mystery. It's a bottomless hole, paranormal and supernatural elements to it. We've got a talking creature. We've got like weird things going on with the government. It's got everything, which is probably why this story inspired me to write my own TV show called Bottomless. Now, it's not exactly the same. In my story, a guy finds a bottomless hole on his property, has a relationship with a radio show host who convinces him to lower himself into the hole, where he finds an alternate universe where everything he has ever wanted is laid out in front of him. If you think it sounds good, you can read the pilot script. If there are any producers watching this, get in contact with me. It's a great show, it's a great concept, and there's clearly interest in it. So that's the story of Mels Hole. What do you think? Leave me a comment, let me know if you think it exists. Let me know what you think happened to the bloody wombats in Australia without Mel being there to rescue and research them. If you like this video, consider subscribing. I try and make videos regularly. I am kind of oscillating between deep dive videos and more kind of light-hearted ones like this. And that's it. Thanks for watching.